I'd like to invite Mr. Nihar Shah, Presidential Director, Global Cooling Efficiency Program, Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, on the stage to deliver the keynote address. Mr. Shah has led research on alternate refrigerants, energy efficiency for heating, ventilation, air conditioning, and refrigeration equipment. Notably, he also leads Berkeley Labs research in support of the Clean Cooling Collaborative in India, China, Southeast Asia, and several other emerging economies. He is also a member of the Refrigeration, Air Conditioning, and Heat Pump Technical Options Committee of the Montreal Protocol. His other research interests include advanced manufacturing, circular economy, and water technology. We welcome you, sir. Over to you.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction. So, my name is Nihar Shah, and I direct the Global Cooling Efficiency Program at Lawrence Berkeley Lab. And today I'll be talking a little bit about an opportunity for India's global leadership in cooling. So before I get started, a few acknowledgements. Obviously, AEEE, Satish, it's so nice to see so many old and new friends here. So Satish and Akash have been very kind in hosting me and inviting me here. And then, of course, my team at Berkeley Lab, I'd very much like to thank them, the Global Cooling Efficiency Program folks. Of course, want to acknowledge our funders, the Clean Cooling Collaborative, National Philanthropic Trust, who are funding most of our recent work. Of course, I've had many other funders as well in my journey. And then I also want to make a special mention to my family and my sister who's here as well. So she's in the audience, and thanks for coming and supporting me. So just a brief introduction. I think many of you folks know Lawrence Berkeley Lab. We're a US Department of Energy national lab run by the University of California. We're based in California, and we have 16 Nobel Prizes in our history. About 17, just recently, Ashok Gadgil from our lab actually got the National Medal for Science and Technology Innovation from President Biden. So now with 17, we just updated that. 3,400 employees, about 200 acres in the Berkeley area. We're dedicated to solving the most pressing scientific problems facing humanity. In fact, our motto is bringing science solutions to the world. And we have more than 2 decades of work internationally on clean energy and climate policy, appliances, buildings, transport, industry, air quality, everything that you can think of that is related to climate and clean tech. Significant focus on energy efficiency. In fact, there's this focus on efficiency started, of course, with the 1970s oil shock with Art Rosenfeld, actually. He was actually in physics, and then started to think about, that this oil shock, and we need to start conserving energy. So he moved the whole field. He actually started the whole idea around energy efficiency at the lab. And he started to advocate for energy efficiency standards. It started at this lab, and then the California government, and then the federal government, the US Appliance Standards Efficiency Program actually began at Berkeley Lab. And now there continues to be a significant focus on energy efficiency, including continuing technical support for the US Department of Energy's rulemaking processes. We also provided technical support, and I was personally involved in the negotiations of the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol. And then currently we're also providing a lot of technical support in market transformation programs for energy efficient cooling equipment in many different countries around the world, including China, India, ASEAN, etc. All countries with high cooling demand. And we work very closely with UN agencies, including very particularly the UN Environment Program's United for Efficiency Initiative. So I was just in Nairobi, Kenya at the Montreal Protocol negotiations, and just wanted to give you a little sense of, as I said, I love elephants. I saw at a previous session. And so this is Amboseli National Park, Kenya. I'll tell you a little bit of why I'm mentioning this. So the elephants here that you see, they're enjoying quite a lot of lush vegetation. So that vegetation actually comes from Kilimanjaro, the mountain, the volcano behind Amboseli National Park. And obviously there's the question in 1885, there's the Scottish explorer was asking this question, how can such large game live in this extraordinary desert? And the answer, of course, is the mountain. Formed a few million years ago with a volcanic eruption. It quenches the thirst of millions of people and wildlife in that ecosystem. But actually, it's semi-arid. And I was surprised when I went there, because it's an ecosystem that's on the brink of collapse, I would say. So this is one of the reasons why I think just reminding ourselves as to why we're here, what really matters. And for me, of course, elephants matter, all of you matter. And so I wanted to just explain a little bit of what is happening. So if you look at what's happened with Kilimanjaro since 1912, and this was a picture that I took. This is October 2023, and you can see that the snow is disappearing. So when the snow disappears, where will these elephants go? And so, of course, elephants are one being. They're not the only one, but we need to think about what we're doing to ourselves and to the planet. Now, space cooling demand is skyrocketing. This is an analysis from 2018's IEA's Future of Cooling report. The brown line you see is their projection of business as usual. Of course, IEA is known for their projections and also sometimes wrong projections. But they're also showing the efficient cooling scenario, the blue line. And the difference between the brown line and the blue line is actually 45% savings in terms of energy efficiency. So they're basically assuming that with 45% energy savings, you actually still see the energy demand growing by 1.5 times from today's rate. So this implies that we're very far away. Even if we implement a lot of energy efficiency, we're very far away from being on path to 1.5 degree scenario. So that means that we actually have to accelerate, we have to deploy much more efficiency, much more conservation, much more demand response, and do a lot more to actually get to a point at which we are having the impact that's necessary because of the growing needs. Obviously, this comes from the fact that the global air conditioner stock is projected to grow 300% to over 5.5 billion overall, driven by things like electrification, increasing incomes, again, increasing temperatures. Obviously, in places like Goa, you see high humidity as well. So all of these are contributing to this high demand. The India Cooling Action Plan forecasts similarly space cooling demand in India growing 8-fold by 2037. So of course we need a drastic reduction in this cooling energy demand, and we need to think about and come together and try to think about what we can do to actually have an impact and reduce that cooling energy demand and the negative impacts of it. So I think you must have also heard Satish talk about cooling degree days. And this chart shows you what happened in China from, I would say, the mid-90s to about mid-2016 or so. Essentially, the air conditioner ownership rate went from 5% to over 100%, 124%, which means everyone in China, or at least the urban people, own more than one air conditioner. And that is likely to happen in many other countries. Now, India has 3 to 4 times the cooling degree days of China. So if everyone in India starts to own more than 2 air conditioners, and now you have Nigeria, Indonesia, Thailand, Philippines also with similar cooling degree days. So what does that mean for the planet? Everyone owns more than 2 air conditioners. Already we're seeing impacts that are very scary. So we need to think about what we're doing, and maybe air conditioning everyone is not necessarily the answer. And maybe the air conditioners that we're using also not necessarily the best one. So we need to think about how are we deploying the technology that needs to be deployed. So one other thing that because I'm in the Montreal Protocol ecosystem and we're advising them about how to improve energy efficiency as well, I wanted to take a minute to talk about this. So this chart shows you the cooling transition in terms of the phase down of refrigerants that has been negotiated under the Montreal Protocol. So the blue line essentially is the EU F-gas regulation. And the EU, of course, is going further faster. The red line shows you the phase down schedule of the what are called the Article 2 countries, or the developed economies. And then the green lines are showing you 2 sets of what are called Article 5 countries, or the developing economies. And essentially what you see is between these red line and green lines is where the industry transition is happening, right? So we basically have between 7 to 10 years to have the impact we need to deploy the right technology. After this is done, the technology will be deployed, at least to a large degree in many countries. So there is a small window between now and 2030 to get the right answers, to get the right technology deployed, to get the right business models, to build capacity, to build regulatory capacity, to build policies. All of that capacity needs to be built in the next 7 to 10 years, and that's where all of you come in. So one other thing that we need to think about, and we talked about this in a session just that was happening, is we need to think about how are we actually deploying this technology. So first of all, we need to think about what are called valleys of death, right? I think many of you folks that are in the startup ecosystem understand this metaphor of valleys of death. Essentially, there's this concept called technology readiness levels. and it goes, of course, from 1 to 10. Basic research being lower down, so on the left side here, and then towards deployment or the market would be a higher number. And essentially, there are a few values of death, which means technologies and startups that are trying to deploy these alternate technologies or more climate-friendly technologies face various barriers. And essentially, we need to think through, when they're facing a particular barrier, how is it that the ecosystem can be designed to get a startup or a technology or a product from one side of the valley of death to the other side of the valley of death? And are we designing the ecosystems in a way where these technologies and startups are getting the help that they need? So we need to think carefully about all of that, right? And so here you see, for example, startups, product development, market validation, and establishing a track record. These are just shorthand. Actually, what we need is to be able to map each technology and each startup to the question that they're asking. What is it that they're struggling with, and how can the ecosystem be designed to make sure that we're getting them across the bridge? And sometimes the answer is no. Sometimes the answer is maybe this entrepreneur should be pivoting or doing something else with their time. So we need to also take no as an answer. And we need to be able to have mentors that are being intellectually honest with our startups and saying, maybe this is not the right area for you, or maybe you need to license your technology and maybe you should not be the entrepreneur that's taking this forward, right? We need all of these kinds of answers to be able to really get the deployment that we need. We really get all the technologies to scale. One other observation I'll make is that as you go from left to right, you'll see the scale, that is the size of the capital that is being deployed, is increasing. So that is another thing to keep in mind, is that actually what we need to do is also make sure that we de-risk the technology earlier on, so that once the big money is on the table, we're not losing billions of dollars on the wrong answer. So that's another way that we need to make sure that we design the ecosystem. Again, this is a cartoon. Essentially, what we need to do is to really map, again, the technologies and the products and the startups to the questions that they're asking, to the valleys of death, and design the ecosystem to make sure that we're actually being able to bridge them across. Another thing that I'd like to mention, so I stole this from Prasad, actually. But essentially, this is an interesting way to think about it, right? Which is, if you think about the way that we prioritize the things that we do, right? Air conditioning, district cooling. And you think about access to finance versus the impact on people, right? People on the street necessarily in India, in Goa here, they're not going to have access to air conditioning in 2030, 2050. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. But we need to therefore prioritize. Are we prioritizing nature-based solutions? Are we prioritizing passive solutions? Or are we just paying air conditioner manufacturers to make more air-conditioned buildings? And is that going to lead to a happier life? So what we need is, of course, we need district cooling as well. We need air conditioning as well. We're not going to be able to actually get to the point that we need all of these things, but we need to be able to do these things in an integrated way, in a holistic way, bring these things together. So how can we change our financing and business model so that our district cooling companies and our air conditioning companies aren't fighting with our nature-based solutions folks and aren't fighting with our passive solutions guys, right? We need to integrate all of it and make sure that the finance is also getting to the nature-based solutions, is also getting to the passive strategies. So we need to maybe even start from there, start from the common people, start from elephants, start from biodiversity, center things that really matter to the common person, and make sure that the finance is going where it's needed. So we have to have this integrated approach, otherwise we're not going to get to where we need to get to. We definitely need to change the way we think. We need to have that integrated approach. And that way, I think we'll be able to have the impact that we need and be able to, be able to get people the access to cooling that they need. One other thing that we need to think about is energy efficiency, of course. I'm preaching to the choir here, right? All of you know total cost of ownership. Efficiency should happen on its own. We've all heard it, right? It's cheaper. The total cost of ownership is low. Why doesn't it happen? So I think, again, here the business models need to be designed so that the total cost of ownership gets wrapped into the first cost. Because if I'm buying an equipment or whatever solution, envelope solution that's more costly for me on the front end, then maybe I won't go for it, right? So that's another example of, I think, innovating in the business model and making sure that we're actually getting these blended finance strategies in place, getting business models in place that are able to actually address these in a holistic fashion. So cooling as a service is another example. Of course, you must have heard about it. You have heard about it. Another thing that we need to do is center indigenous technology. Of course, this is the Reserve Bank of India note, 100 rupee note, we use it all the time. But what's it showing you here? This is a step well. We have the indigenous architecture to address the urban heat island effect. Our Prime Minister, our Reserve Bank of India, has put it on a 100 rupee note. We can export that kind of thinking, that kind of technology everywhere, right? So we do know how to address the urban heat island effect. A 100 rupee note shows it. So why don't we do it more? Why doesn't our urban design include a 100 rupee note stepwell? Gujarat, right? Rani Ki Vav. So we need to really start to think about centering blue and green first and making sure that our finance models are designed in a way where we're able to do this, right? So going back to my previous point about making sure that we're doing this integrated approach and centering traditional indigenous technologies. There is also, for example, you can think about evaporative cooling, right? Mitti Cool, a great example. There are other instances of traditional indigenous technologies that we have lost and that we need to bring back, again, in order to address this in a holistic way. So my more or less final point, I think India has proven in the G20, right, that we could be the voice of the global South. And Prime Minister Modi's leadership, that happened, right? There was a doubt. Is there going to be a G20 leaders declaration? That was the question. Before the G20 leaders meeting, there was a question, right? Are we going to get the global North? And of course, right now there's so many wars being fought, right, around all of these questions. And so India did a very brilliant thing by being actually able to get the global North and the global South together. AEEE can play that role. All of you in this room can play that role, to be able to bring the global North and the global South, who are usually not able to talk to each other because of these priorities being different. This is the opportunity that, again, and I will again put impact and people on this side and finance on the other side, right? Again, we have that capability to bring these two streams together and to be able to have the impact to be the voice of the heat-stressed global South. And this is the opportunity that I think we have in front of us and we need to capitalize on. So with that, I'm actually going to stop and take questions and make sure that you folks have a chance to give us and give your thoughts on this topic. Thanks. And yeah, feel free to get in touch with me. Actually, could you put the last slide back up? Thanks. If you have questions or you need more information, my email is on there, and my website is as well on there. So feel free to get in touch, and yeah, happy to address any questions. So go ahead.
Thank you,
Yes.
Dr. Shah, for the insightful presentation. Coming from the Indian academia, I feel that we always feel that we have an opportunity to become a Vishwaguru. And the dilemma that we are having is that whether we should use molecular simulation to design the next generation refrigerant or use traditional architecture. How do we marry between these two concepts? One is high-end research and the other is revisiting your ancient heritage. So any suggestions that you may like to share with us?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think we need both. And frankly, I mean, yes, I said indigenous technology. I work at a US national lab in Silicon Valley. We also need demand response. We also need IoT. We also need, if we were to get to 100% renewable energy system, which is the only system that is actually sustainable in the long run, right? If it's 100% renewable energy, we need loads that can follow renewable energy, intermittent renewable energy, right? So IoT is needed. So alternate refrigerants as well. I work on that as well in the Montreal Protocol. We need alternate refrigerants. We need potentially non-vapor compression systems. We need those as well. But we need to be able to do it in a way where we're addressing the needs of the common people first. We're starting with nature-based solutions and passive solutions first, so that the sizes of our systems, they're affordable for the common person, and they're reaching the vast majority of people, and again, we're having the impact we need. But yes, we're absolutely going to, I mean, if you go to like, even in India, but like if you go to Saudi Arabia, right now they won't be able to step out onto the street without having an air conditioner. So, and I hope that we don't get to a point where we get to that point in India, right? But so we absolutely are going to have to do all of these things together, and we need to have the conversation. We need to sit around as a circle. We need to be able to talk to each other and make sure that we're looking each other in the eye and considering the other person's perspective and including our own and integrating them. So that's why I said an integrated approach is the way that we need to go. It's not just refrigerants, and it's not just the traditional technology. We have to bring them together, but I would say we have to center the needs of the common person, center biodiversity, center blue and green infrastructure first, and then build out the more expensive stuff.
Thank you.
I have the mic, so might as well. I really liked your last slide. Instead of voice of the heat-stressed global south, I could say innovator of the heat-stressed global south. I would like to see that for India. But on the other side of nature-based solutions and indigenous wisdom, I think I really resonated with that. I just got the chance to visit Indonesia, and they were using bamboo as a sustainable agroforestry means of, but there were policies in place that the government had about tenurial land rights and about how bamboo-based agroforestry and other things could make land more productive. And so that could, contribute to carbon sequestration and things like that. What role does the Indian government have and can do, and how can we work with them to incentivize nature-based solutions through these kind of policies and incentives, like tenurial land rights, for example?
Yeah, so I am probably going to not be going to comment on necessarily what the Indian government can do, because I think I'm going to say what governments can do generally. Because I think silos exist everywhere, right? So let's say even in the US or in other countries, you'll find, like even in the Montreal Protocol context, we have folks that are working on refrigerants, we have folks that are working on energy efficiency, impacting the same industry. They don't talk to each other, right? Two different ministries, and potentially, they could talk to each other, they could design integrated programs, they could leverage each other's strengths, and that sometimes doesn't happen. So one of the things that I think we need to get rid of is, I'm working on this and you're working on that, and you go over there and I go over there, and we don't talk to each other, right? So breaking down silos across all, and I don't just mean this with respect to governments, I think with respect to academia as well. If I run my research program over here, and Satish, he was at LBN, right? He runs the research program over there, we don't talk to each other. What's the point, right? Reshma over there, she's running a different research program, we don't talk to each other. What's the point? Because we're doing similar things, we could help each other out. So I think one of the things that we definitely need to do is to be able to break down silos. And so I would, and this is not, again, not just for governments, I think across the board. Now, indigenous technologies, I'll say one more thing about this, right? So India, of course, we were, we got independence in 1947, right? But we were colonized. And there's a silo on the India-Pakistan border, for example, right? So we have to think about, like, are we really thinking as a planetary species? So, and think from the broadest possible perspective first. So when I say this, what I mean also is, when you look at indigenous technologies, some of these things have been ignored or have been lost because we've been looking only to the West, right? We've been looking only to the West for solutions. And I think we need to look West for solutions, but we also need to look in our own hearts and our own technologies for solutions, because they exist, and integrate both. Take the best of both. We don't need to only say, oh, there's this sexy technology over there in the West that Satish is going to bring to India, okay? We need to also say that we have, that sexy technology needs to get integrated with this amazing technology that we have already over here, and bring them both together. So thank you for the question. Yeah.
Hi. Hi. There's a lot of emphasis recently on making better air conditioners, better refrigerants, and all that we have seen. And also recently, the global cooling price is one of those cases where to push for technological advancements in air conditioners, and which is great. But the same kind of intensity, or the same kind of probably the intent is not seen when you mentioned about passive design or nature-based solutions, or maybe something that we are not aware of if there is something that's already happening. Can you just talk a little bit about those initiatives that can help push the nature-based solutions and passive design solutions?
Yeah, so first I'll say a little bit about the global cooling price. I think I helped design the price, and in hindsight, of course, it's 2020, so there was something that if we did it again, we would probably do it differently. So there's a couple things I'll say about that. One is that that the timeline for the prize was maybe about a year and a half from start to finish. I think if we'd gone longer, or if we'd changed the length of the time we allowed the applications to come in and then go from prototype to actually testing and so on, we would have seen a different portfolio of products and maybe even different winners. We had, I think, out of the 8 finalists, we had 4 startups and 4 established companies. And the winners were only the established companies because they couldn't get a prototype done, right? So they again faced a valley of death. Now that doesn't mean that the startups didn't have a technology that would have had an impact. Maybe they were better. So if we had had a longer pipeline, potentially we would have seen a different answer. Now, the other thing that I'll say is, after the global cooling prize came out, yes, there were 2 companies that won. Where is the product? Have you been able to buy one? So we need to think about how we go from just a prize to the rest of the ecosystem as well, right? So I think part of what happened, I mean, if you look at these values of death again, right? So basic research was there, they've demonstrated it. Where's the deployment, right? So there's something there that's happening. And we need to go and ask the question to those companies, to the people that designed the prize, including myself. What is that valley of death? What are the things? And I'll give you a couple of answers to that as well. So first, the global cooling prize technology dehumidified better than the baseline. But unfortunately, our energy efficiency metrics across the board, including India's ICR metric, but also the international ISO metric, and in fact, in the US as well, there's no requirement for being able to measure better dehumidification. So if your air conditioners are overcooling, and other air conditioners are able to dehumidify without overcooling, you can't see the energy savings in your energy label. So we're working actually with AEEE, with CEPT University, etc., to actually fix the energy efficiency metric to be able to reflect better to consumers where the energy savings are coming from. That is going to be a process. So fixing efficiency metrics is not an easy thing, but that's one part that, and then there's other pieces to this, right? So the estimate from the organizers was that the cost of the cooling technology is roughly twice the cost of the baseline. If you're going to go buy an air conditioner and the sales guy is going to tell you, this one costs twice what the other one, are you going to go and say total cost of ownership there? Maybe, maybe not. If you're an energy geek, maybe you will, right? But we need to be able to get now at the retail phase, we need to be able to have salespeople that bring total cost of ownership to people. So that's another valley of death that we need to bridge, right? Now coming to your other question around passive and stuff, right? So I'm not an architect, I'm a mechanical engineer. I'm not necessarily sure I'm the best person to answer that question, right? But I do think that a prize is I would say like a particular type of architecture in terms of like there's a goal, and so you have to have a certain kind of EM and V strategy, right? You have to have a way of being able to differentiate who's going to win and who's going to lose. Sometimes those things are harder for buildings, for example, right? How do you, building A, building B, climate is different, situation is different, building materials are different, how are you going to say this one is better than the other one? So some of these things might not be amenable to a prize. There might be a better way of doing it, and I think Solar Decathlon in India is one great way to do that. There might be other ways to do that as well. So, thank you.
Yeah, if not a prize, I was saying initiatives or programs that to push the passive agenda, if not like the way it was seen in pushing the technological advancements in refrigerant-based cooling solutions. So,
yeah, I mean, there are initiatives that are coming up. There's, I believe, there's different initiatives that are focusing on resilience, for example, as well. So, I mean, Ashtrock Resilience Center, there are a few, there's the Global Cool Cities Alliance. I mean, again, I'm not necessarily advocating one or the other is better. I'm saying there's many models out there, and we need to think through, which of these are better at deploying the passive solutions that we need, and that, let's say, India needs and these countries in the global south need. So, I'm not the best solution. Go ask Prasad, actually, what the answer to that question is. Maybe he'll tell you.
Can we have some questions from our students? And then we'll okay.
Can you ask Satish, please? Okay.
Hello, sir. My name is Mehek. I've just finished 12th grade, and I'm applying to UC Berkeley. So
all the best.
This is very, very cool. So this presentation is very comprehensive, and I still, sir, this graph is very fascinating. But sir, please help me get some context.
Yeah.
Can you give me or give all of us one success case and one failure case that shows us the valley of death to walk us through that if we are pursuing a project, if there is something that we want to move from an ideation stage to a development stage, just walking us through will probably give us a fair idea of what actually the valley of death is.
Okay, so I took part in an entrepreneurship training program, similar to one of the programs that my colleague Reshma was talking about, Impel. The one that I took part in was called LabCore. The technology was designed by a different colleague of mine at LBNL, and it was called My Green Car. Now, the idea was that it was a better way of measuring fuel economy using car fuel economy using an app-based. And basically, because our phones now are able to do so many different things, he, of course, is an entrepreneur, so all entrepreneurs think our technology is the best, right? Because we're in love with that. Of course, that is one of the things that incubator programs are designed to cure. Because if I think my technology is the best, I'm not listening to what the customer wants. So incubator programs need to first unwed, I would say, entrepreneurs from their love of their technology and get them to a point at which they're able to be intellectually honest with themselves about whether this technology is right for this application. The second thing we learn in entrepreneurship programs is a thing called pivoting. So let's say that technology was good for a particular kind of car, but not good for electric cars. I don't know for sure, but let's just say it was good for one kind of car, not for another kind of car. And he was going towards, let's say, the regular car, right? So pivoting is another thing that you're trying to understand in which market is this going to apply. Another thing that entrepreneurs sometimes do is we like to tell ourselves stories. I mean, all human beings do this, right? We like to tell ourselves stories. My technology is going to succeed, right? And then I'll go to a VC and say, so there's like, I don't know, 100 or 500 million cars, and then some optimistic projection, then show an IEA chart showing how much it's going to grow. And then clearly the market is huge. So give me a few $1 million, right? So part of this, actually what the customer discovery process was to really be honest with ourselves. It's okay, out of the overall market, actually this company is going to address 0.1% of the market. And then it's actually at the early end of the scale. And it's actually going to need this, this, and this before it gets to the point at which it becomes a Tesla or it becomes a Ford or whatever. So getting the entrepreneurial mindset into the scientist or the innovator was the number one thing that type of program needs to do. And that was just one example. But yeah, of course, there's many others. And I'm sure there's other innovators that give you much better answers. Yeah.
More students? Anybody? Before we sort of come back to this side of the hall. Anybody? Oh, sir.
So Nihar, thanks a lot for your presentation. I'm going to start with a quote, okay? So this is, fire can be used to warm ourselves on a cold night, but it can also be used to burn down the house. The same is true for electricity and nuclear energy. Making energy available for human use is an important accomplishment, but learning how to use this energy well is at least as essential. So this is by, I don't know how to pronounce his name, but Mihaly, Finding Flow is the book. And I sometimes feel, and I think I'm going back to the question that Monish asked, that while you are also advocating that both passive and active cooling, I mean, both are important, and especially for India, I mean, I very strongly believe that India will not be able to achieve thermal comfort for all if we are just going to push active cooling. And I think one of the things that, in my opinion, what I have seen over last few years or decade, is that nobody was paying attention to passive cooling, nobody. I think the credit to some extent goes to India Cooling Action Plan. Because I think in that document, there was a clear thing that passive is the way to go. You cannot just say keep pushing the air conditioner. And I think while there is a little bit in terms of the projects that we see that are getting funded, and I think those kind of things, if we want to see that as a metric, I still feel that it's just a drop in the ocean I think when we look at, I think how much work is happening globally or how much funds are flowing, I think through the passive building design or passive solutions or nature-based solutions, and I think what is happening in the active field. So I think the question and the dilemma is, I think that are we on the right track? We know that we are in a climate emergency. We know that embodied carbons and these things are becoming more and more important. There was a lot of discussion, I think, at this conference on this. And I think for a country like India, you also talked about Global South and Global North, which also I feel G20 kind of this year's made it a point. So when you say that India has to become like a global, or India has the opportunity to become a global leader, what do you think? Because there are a lot of people, and I will tell you, there are lots of students here. When the students come out, all are advocates of passive cooling, or not all, probably 80 or 90% are advocates of passive cooling. But during the course of the career, they start to veer because that's where the action is, that's where the funding is. So it's a rhetorical question, it's a difficult question, but I also want you, because you are looking at India from an outside-in perspective, and you are also connected, I think, in terms of, I think, what is happening. But this is a very, very important question. I think that is something that this audience can probably take away from an LBNL scientist, somebody who is really into the thick of policy making or influencing, somebody who's in think of like innovation, I think fundraising, multilateral funding, all of that. So what is your sense? I mean, and give me an unvarnished answer on this. I think what do you think should happen? And then what is happening, and what is, I think, what we should do to turn things around a little bit.
So there's this old story, I don't know, some of you folks may have heard about the chessboard and the grain of rice. Okay. So infinite growth on a finite planet cannot exist. This is something that the global north does not understand, has not yet grappled with fully, and is starting to grapple with. I think India is in a position to confront the global north with that point. The conversations are happening. 3 weeks ago in Marrakesh, the IMF and the World Bank met about restructuring, about bringing the concept of climate finance and debt traps, poverty, and also climate resilience. If you're trying to design a solar project, let's say in an African country, and you're trying to design a very similar solar project in, let's say, Germany, the cost of capital is very different. And it may not necessarily reflect actually the fact that the projects are very similar. So first of all, I think we ourselves, I myself, first have to cure ourselves of our extractive mindset. We have to decondition, decolonize ourselves. So that means not necessarily, again, looking to the West, to the global north, because I can't, if I am going to somebody and saying, please give me money, I'm not going to be able to confront them and say, don't extract, right? I mean, many of the startups are also facing a similar issue, many of us. So that, I think, is the number one thing that we got to do first, is to not only look at the global north as, oh, you people, we need to come back to our ancient traditions, we need to come back to the land, we need to come back to belonging to the places that we live in, to the communities that we are in, and to see so we need to start there. Then I think we need to also be honest with ourselves that there is an economic system that is extracting currently. I'm participating in it. I have an endowed chair. What that means is that there's some interest rate that gets, from the economic system that pays my salary. I'm still giving you this answer because I know that infinite growth on a finite planet cannot exist. It's true. So what do we do, right? This question goes to, it's not an LBNL scientist that needs to give you this answer, because I am not actually qualified to give this answer. This needs to come from the people, the pundits that are supposedly about monetary policy. Okay, we need to redesign our currency systems to actually not be debt-based money, not have extractive. So right now, part of the issue is that our money system, in order for people to be employed, requires growth. That needs to change. It needs to be, so the growth imperative needs to get addressed. And that is a Bretton Woods multilateral, World Bank, IMF answer. Now, putting that aside again, because we are not in that room, that is a different room, what can we do, right? So the folks here, and also folks that have access to capital, we need to think about, do I really need 5%? Maybe I can do 3%, right? And again, I think part of that is also, if I take away grandma's pension, then I need to design a village around her. Otherwise, who's going to take care of her? So, in order to address the growth mindset, we need to come back to our villages. We need to build our communities. Before we address the growth mindset, that needs to get built. So, we need to come back again to green, blue, community, biodiversity, start there, right? And we need financiers who are willing to have more patient view and not extract, because infinite growth on a finite planet cannot exist.
Hello. Hi, Niyar. Going back to the previous slide of the cooling pyramid, where the bottom is the nature-based solutions. So, if you look at this, you can see that the top two tiers are really where private equity focuses, but it's also private ownership of those assets. When you come down to passive solutions, yes, it may or may not be private ownership of the asset, and we don't see a lot of private equity putting money there. When you come to nature-based solutions, it is not a private asset. It is a commons. And in the past, we've always looked as public or government funding to be able to develop the commons. So do you think that given the current crisis, there is going to be any private equity that will flow to the bottom of the pyramid?
I think that's a question for the private equity. So let me put it this way, right? Bezos Earth Fund, there are these philanthropists, capitalists that are giving money, right, to nature-based solutions. Goldman Sachs gave money for a, I would say, a biodiversity preserve in Patagonia, okay? The Patagonia guy gave away his company. So there are people who have the right values, who have the money, and who can change the thing. But that's not everyone. And we need to continue to have these conversations in order to really confront people with roti kapada makan, right? What more do you need? Do you need $1 billion? Who needs $1 billion? You tell me, right? So, yeah, private equity and all, that's happening in a particular context, right? But we need to continue to have these conversations and to really understand what is at the heart of that, right? Which is maybe because my grandparents faced scarcity, maybe I have a scarcity mindset, which is why I go around thinking that I don't have enough. So I might need some amount of trauma work, some amount of therapy, some amount of body work, some amount of all kinds of things in order to get to the point at which I am able to register the fact that I have enough. I may not be able to understand that. So we need to have conversations that are deep enough where those things are addressed with the people that have the resources as well. Because those people, yes, they have the money, but they don't have community. People on the bottom have community, people at the top are alone. So that's, I think, what also we need to do is we need to bring them back to community. That's one answer. That's my sister.
But all along, all of these things, I've been watching you put together, watching your work and stuff, and I realized that we think of ourselves as humans as we're cooling, all of this is for humans, and
yes.
there is the elephants, or all of that.
Anthropocentric, yes.
Yeah, so the thing is that when we realize, I feel that we are not, it's not an us and them with the biodiversity or whatever.
Yes.
So I think that prioritization, I don't know how it works in finance or in, energy or tech terms or whatever, but when we realize that if it's not us and them, if they go, we go.
Yes.
So that also needs to be addressed somewhere. So I like your thoughts on that.
No, you're absolutely right. And one of the things that, I saw this movie that impacted me a lot. It's called Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee. And one of the things that there was this young man who was a half Native American. No, he was full Native American, but he, at 6 years old or something, he was taken away from the Indian reservation or the Native American reservation. and trained in the Western medical doctor situation, whatever. He had this mindset. And then there's this guy called Senator Dawes who was designing the reservation. They'd found gold at this Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, and they were basically trying to say that if you don't allocate these plots of land to these individual Native American folks, then the white settlers will come in, and then they will lose all the land that they have. So his job, given to him by this guy, Senator Dawes, as part of the Dawes Act, was to take the amount of land that the Sioux, the Native American tribe, had, that they lived on, and parcel it out to individual families. So he took on this job, and he went to his people, back to his people, and he started to talk to them and say, okay, which plot do you want, which plot do you want? And then he gave up. The reason he gave up is that the Sioux, in their language, did not have a word for owning land. How can you own your mother? So that is another part, right? Ownership. That's a point also that Prasad made. We need to come back to what is ownership. Yes, you can own some things, right? But can you own your mother? No. You come from your mother, you're responsible to your mother, but you can't own your mother. So we don't own planet, we cannot own land. Owning bodies and owning land is the same thing. So we need to revisit some of these things fundamentally as well. Ownership we need to revisit fundamentally. Now, obviously these are deep questions. It's going to require a lot of work to get to that point. And it's not an easy question. But we can learn from the Sioux, we can learn from the indigenous people. That's one answer.
So one question which I have, like how much the big challenge for the last two is the quantification, which is not done much. So how much do you think is the weightage given to the research done to the top two and the bottom two?
Yeah, that's also related because, see, measurement. So there's this very famous theorem. It's called Gödel's incompleteness theorem. But what it has to do with is understanding the limits of the human mind. We cannot measure and quantify everything that's important. And so we might actually need to be able to have models that do things without measurement and without quantification. Because when I measure and quantify something, I'm already in the mindset where then I can start to parcel it out. And this is one of the problems, I think, generally, in my opinion, with carbon markets, is that if you have an infinitely expanding economic system, infinitely expanding money system, and at the same time you have a carbon market, at some point, somewhere, instead of preserving the forest, you will sell it. So we need to come back again to some things should be beyond ownership. And so you need to maybe have national parks, you need to have things that are owned by the commons, things that are owned by the people, right? So we need to have different models, things that belong to the people or people belong to them, right? But yeah, so quantification isn't a full answer, I think, yeah.
And
yes.
we can say what is the impact it is creating.
Yes.
The other, like the neutral, natural, nature-based solution or passive, unless we say what is the amount it can give back,
yeah,
or the impact it can create, I think that will also be a way to go ahead.
Yeah, I think so. There are also intermediate answers between, like, we're right now in the system and the mindset we're in, and we have to get to the system and mindset where we actually all belong to the planet with all the biodiversity, etc. So there will be intermediate answers where these valuations, etc., will be important. And yeah, I think figuring out things that are, at least with respect to carbon, where the most impact might be, etc., I think those are valuable. We need to do that. So I think I don't think it's a contradiction to say that we might have some short-term answers that work, and then some other longer-term answers. We need both. And so yeah, I think that's also a fair point.
Okay, good evening, sir. So this is Priyami from AEEE. So and first of all, I would like to thank you for agreeing to give this very thoughtful presentation. Thank you so much. So of all the measures which are displayed on the screen, it's generally nature-based solutions which are not discussed enough when you talk of cooling demand and addressing the cooling demand. I don't know, because maybe there is not enough expertise of these elite people, are experts. I don't know what is the reason. Mostly it may be so that it is the indigenous people who are more better placed to speak on these kind of solutions. Yes. But when we see the stakeholder consultation, these indigenous people are generally not part of the conversation.
Yes.
So how we as a think tank, or how we as practitioners or of clean energy transition can bring this set of people into the conversation, so that we can also gain their perspective, their expertise.
Yeah, so I think this is also, when we relate to indigenous people or people, let's call them people that have not left the land that they're from. Yeah? When we talk to them, we need to relate to them in their own framework. Sometimes the thing is, we are only relating to them in our frameworks, in the way that we think, and okay, please tell me how slowly I should kill you, for example, right? Yes, that's an example of the kind of, how should I say, cognitive dissonance that sometimes occurs to them when they're encountering a system that is slowly dismantling the ecosystems that they are a part of, right? So we need to go back to learning from them, to start to learn from them first. And go with humility, not go with like, okay, I have all the answers and you need to now, within my framework, tell me where you fit in. We need to go with humility and then understand where they're coming from, and maybe we have a lot to learn from them. And then after that, we can have a conversation, maybe more as equals. And maybe, yeah, we have some technology that they can benefit from, and maybe they have a mindset that we can benefit from, we both, right? So I think we need to have a conversation first about, are we really listening? Once we are listening, then we can have a conversation where they can be at the table. And yeah, some of these structures that we've set up, might need to be revisited. And again, it's a slow conversation. This is not something that's going to necessarily happen tomorrow. But yeah, absolutely. I think indigenous people need to be at the table, but we need to think through, do I have the right mindset to learn from them? And sometimes that's not the case.
Yeah, so I have a question around the green credits program that the Indian government has brought in. And do you think it will play a role in the bottom two?
I unfortunately don't know enough to really answer the question, but if you educate me a little bit more, maybe offline, we can have a conversation, and I can learn more from you and then give you a better answer as to where it might fit in my way of thinking about things.
Hi, thanks for really addressing the elephant in the room, right? At some level, we all believe it's a question of the development paradigm, the notion of infinite growth, capital, greed, right? And it seems many of us really agree to that in our heart, right? And at the other hand, we have what we do professionally, right? We are part of this system, right? So given end of the day, a very good discussion, rather than going back feeling good and doing what we do from tomorrow, how can we as a group think of bridging the gap? Can we have a roadmap of bringing these two things together?
Yeah, so I don't know if you folks have heard of this Japanese concept called ikigai. Yeah, maybe some of you have. There's these books that a crossword will have something, etc. Right? So part of this is understanding each of us is here for a reason. Each of us has a gift that we've been given that was your deal with the one who made you. Right? So part of this has to do with understanding and really delving into what that is for myself, and then being honest with myself about, do I love what I'm doing? Am I good at what I'm doing? Am I being honest with myself about those two things? And then coming back to my reason for existence, my value, my gift, right? And then giving that to the world, and then things will happen, because once you are your gift, you can't help but give it, and other people can't help but notice it. So then I think from there, we will get to where we need to get to, hopefully. Yeah, inshallah.
Yeah. Bhaskar here from AEEE. I'm referring to the total cost of ownership that you talked about.
Yeah.
And the fact that the fellow at the retail should be able to explain the total cost of ownership between a 3-star and a 5-star. I think it's a great idea, but I believe we have a long, long way to go, for the simple reason all corporates order such equipment, whether it is IE3 motors, air conditioners, pumps, and so on.
Sure.
In no tender that comes out, whether it is the government or the private, the selection criteria is the total cost of ownership.
Yeah.
Now, all of us in the room know, but tomorrow all the students go back to Levers or Vedanta, they'll simply do what their procedure says. Now, how do you set this right? Why do we keep talking of total cost of ownership when the whole world is refusing to accept total cost of ownership in buying decisions? Second question, does this, I'm sure, apply to corporate buying in the United States as well?
So I think great questions. Again, I'll say that I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all answer. I think, and you're very right that it's, it's possible that the total cost of ownership may not be, that was my way of trying to bring the point that actually efficiency should be happening. And again, like you're very rightly say, everyone in this room probably knows that total cost of ownership may not be how it happens. But I do think that there are, within organizations, there are folks that are, making budgetary decisions from the total cost of ownership perspective. They may not be talking with the people that are doing the first cost purchasing, right? So sometimes it might need to be an internal conversation within the organization that can break down a silo. And again, I'm not saying that this is a recipe for, like, it's not going to work in every organization. So we need to find out who has the total cost of ownership, who is looking at the overall budget, right? And then trace that back to who's making the purchasing decisions and are they talking to each other. And yeah, I mean, obviously that's, yeah. Yeah. Sure. Please wait for the mic, yeah.
The question is not who does the budget. The question is, I who buy worth $10 million, I have to tell the world that first price is not my criteria. That it is total cost of ownership. Unless it comes publicly in any document, then it will get some weight.
Right.
But I haven't seen it at all over the last several years in any buying document in the world.
Yeah, no, you're right. And also, I mean, the guy that came up with the triple bottom line, he recently declared a failure, right? So these are conversations that are happening, and yeah, maybe total cost of ownership isn't the right way to go. I mean, maybe there's other metrics that we need to. The point is breaking down silos and figuring out how to have these conversations. And it's absolutely right. If total cost of ownership isn't the way to do it, maybe there's some other way. But we need to have these conversations and value the planet and biodiversity and the bottom line, and people really on the street.
I think they've started lowering the lights.
Yeah.
Almost a signal. But yeah,
So-
very last. Yeah.
Okay,
comment, question,
last.
quick. Yes.
I don't know if I should be saying this, but this is not a question rather. The way I see it, I see that some of the best minds in the country in this domain are sitting in this room today. And whom I personally really admire their work and all of that. Probably, if there are not enough initiatives and policies towards focusing on passive already, like I said, which I'm not aware of, probably this could be an opportunity, or I'm wishing that probably, people can get together and actually take this forward. If we really believe in the whole concept of passive design and nature-based solutions, because that is something that is, I believe, is not talked much about.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that comment. I'll just say a couple additional comments to that, right? There are folks in the, that are not necessarily in these rooms that maybe need to be brought into these rooms. One is public health professionals who are, for example, facing, the heat stress. You go to the hospital, and so bringing those people into the conversation so that we can see, actually passive design is going to have an impact on resilience, is going to have an impact on public health, right? That's one. Second is insurance industry, right? California right now has wildfires, and the insurance industry is saying our business model is not allowing us to insure, okay? So one of the first impacts that's going to happen from climate change and from these other things is going to go towards the insurance industry. There might be other impacts, and so take it as a broader framework that there are people that we need to be talking to that are not in the rooms that we're in, that we need to bring into the room. And then potentially we can have more of these things that actually matter. Thank you.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, thanks. Nihar, you took us inwards really, and there is this pensive mood that hangs over us. But thank you very much, and over to Rashi then. Yes.
Thank you.